The Wolverines and the Buckeyes once again represented the Big Ten in the NFL draft. The 2022 NFL draft is still going on, but the first round is past us. It's the round where the guys who are the most talented coming out of college are selected in. And personally, and this probably has been said before, I'm not that interested in the NFL. The NFL to me is, at points, clinically boring. It's almost like a bad TV show in a certain sense. The players on the field are supposedly so much more talented, etc., etc. And there's a lot of truth to that. But I feel like there's a lot more dropped balls, a lot more almost stupid mistakes. And I think that part of it is because some players get there, they get the money, and there's no longer that almost edge that you feel in college where players are literally playing for a chance to get in the NFL. They're playing for their life in college. There's more energy. There's more, I'd almost say, adrenaline with the crowd noise factor and a lot of the tradition. Where in the NFL, there's no longer that playing for, almost in a sense, playing for your life kind of feel. And there's especially not the same, crowd environment, same tradition, at least in my opinion. Again, my opinion isn't final. It's just my opinion. I'm not interested in the NFL for the most part. I'll sometimes cheer for my own Lions. I'll cheer for players that I like for whatever reason, whether it's because I think they have good character, they're underdogs, I think they're sneaky good, or whether they're just Michigan players and I want to see Michigan players do well in the NFL to build my school a better reputation, give them a recruiting edge, etc. And all these points I just mentioned, we'll talk about to a certain degree. Like Michigan, and we'll get to this in a few minutes more in detail. Maybe not, maybe we'll just do it now. Heck, let's do it now. Michigan football just had the 4th first-round defensive end drafted in the Jim Harbaugh era. This year, it was Aidan Hutchinson, 2nd overall. It was Kwity Paye in the 2021 NFL draft, 21st overall. In 2019, it was Rashawn Gary, 12th overall. Devin Bush Jr. was 10th overall. Linebacker David Ojabo probably would have been in the first round too if not for his Achilles injury. He would have been another first-round linebacker along with Devin Bush. But back to the defensive ends. Rashawn Gary, you have Kwity Paye, you had Aidan Hutchinson, and then in the 2017 NFL draft, you had Taco Charlton, 28th overall. It's just Michigan and first-round defensive players. The only first-rounder in the Harbaugh era who wasn't a defensive player was Cesar Ruiz, an offensive lineman. So, yeah, it's honestly Michigan defensive players, Michigan's reputation, as opposed to what Ohio State is now under Ryan Day, which we'll actually get to later. Michigan is really building a reputation for defensive development, as if they already hadn't under the Jim Harbaugh era. But now they've somewhat built that reputation already, but now they've won something with it. That Big Ten championship it means something, because now recruits, you can no longer tell recruits that Jim Harbaugh can't win a Big Ten title, or that Michigan can't get on the big stage and win something there, even though, yes, we got blown out by Georgia, etc. Please ignore that for a few seconds. Georgia once again having a very good first-round draft day. But anyway, Michigan now finally breaking through, having the culture change, winning something, and once again building a reputation for defensive development is going to be, at least in my opinion, it's going to be big in recruiting, especially if Aidan Hutchinson and Daxton Hill do, after all, pan out. And I'm very curious to see, there's going to be more selections in the draft overall defensively, especially you have David Ojabo, Vincent Gray, other names as well. Christopher Hinton, Donovan Jeter. Don't know if Jeter's going to be drafted, but Hinton probably will be. So there are going to be several defensive names as Michigan lost most of their defensive starters. I think 9 of them to graduation, and all of them are going to attempt to get drafted. Obviously, they have the talent. They played for a good team. They have name recognition. All of them have a chance. So Michigan really building that reputation for defensive development. I still, as a Michigan fan, want to see Michigan under Harbaugh get the first-round wide receiver, get the first-round quarterback. Hopefully JJ can be that, but who knows? Because, again, college football so far, even though what Georgia did was fascinating, still seems to be a more offensive game. And I would love for Michigan to adapt to the times. But Aidan Hutchinson got to stay home. He's excited about that. Him and Jameson Williams both went to the Lions. So I like that. I thought it was bold. And the Jameson Williams part, at least. And Hutchinson is a talented player. He's possibly the hardest worker in the NFL draft. And part of that is me being a fan and being biased. Part of that's also what a lot of analysts have said, where he just plays with fire and is a leader on every snap. Daxton Hill was a 5-star talent from Oklahoma. Safety for Michigan, played corner, safety, strong safety, and free safety, I think. Did everything under the guidance of Steve Clinkscale, his secondary coach, and Mike McDonald, the defensive coordinator. So Michigan, defensive direction, they're building that reputation. I think that this draft really helps their recruiting momentum. There wasn't a lot of it, despite this past season of success, because the whole Harbaugh thing. But that's been the negative and the narrative for quite some time now, because there's not been a lot else to talk about, because for most people it's the off season. For me and other fanatics, it's the preseason. So now finally seeing something positive regarding Michigan football on the big stage once again in the draft with the 2nd overall pick is pleasing. Maybe it can help spark some recruiting momentum. I don't know, though. Ohio State, though, there's certainly evidence that they sparked some recruiting momentum after last night. There's actual evidence of it. Like 5 stars, Carnell Tate and Brandon Innes, who are wide receivers, they tweeted about Ohio State's wide receiver success in the draft. Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, back-to-back first-round picks. Wide receivers, too, which, by the way, I don't think Ohio State has had a first-round wide receiver since the Jim Tressel era, and I don't even know who it was. My mind would tell me it was Ted Ginn Jr., but I don't know if that's true. So if I said that wrong and it was someone else, just tell me down below in the comments. But this hasn't happened to Ohio State in a while. A first-round wide receiver, let alone 2 of them, and let alone, again, I mentioned hypotheticals with Michigan before. I'm going to do it with Ohio State. 3rd, if you count Jameson Williams as being developed mainly by Ohio State, or if you delve into even deeper hypotheticals, if he was on the team, started, got the same recognition, and Ohio State had 3 back-to-back-to-back first-round wide receivers drafted under their name. Recruits basically took it as that, even though Jameson Williams graduated from Alabama and played his final snap with Alabama. And if he didn't get injured in the national championship game, in my opinion, Alabama probably would have won. But again, hypotheticals are just hypotheticals. All that matters is the reality. And the reality is not only Ohio State, what they did, still impressive. 2 first-round wide receivers taken back-to-back. Excuse me there. But what's also a fact is the direction that Ohio State is going under Ryan Day. And we've talked about it before, and the draft just is really evidence to it. This team is heading in a completely offensive direction. They are becoming an offensive factory. The center of offense is what they are becoming. And I think that if you want to challenge the SEC, that this is a great thing for Ohio State. And I think that regardless, it's a great thing for Ohio State. The game is becoming offensive, even with what Georgia did this past season. And heck, maybe now it's going to become a defensive game again. But Ohio State building its identity, doing something different from the rest of the conference. They're further separating themselves, at least by identity, compared to the rest of the conference. Michigan beat them for the first time in a decade, so maybe now there'll be more competition in the Big Ten, and Ohio State won't be as dominant in conference. But from an identity perspective, Ohio State is further separating itself from the rest of the conference, at least by identity. 2 first-round wide receivers, again, but not a single first-round defensive player. You look at the rest of the Big Ten teams. George Karlaftis, first round from Purdue. Jahan Dotson, a wide receiver from Penn State. Tyler Linderbaum, a center from Iowa. Ohio State, it's 2 first-round wide receivers. A lot of those other teams, even though Linderbaum and Dotson are offensive players, Penn State and Iowa are more defensive teams by nature, or at least have been. Penn State, the only reason they didn't miss a bowl game with how atrocious their offense was because of Brent Pry and his elite defense. Iowa, their offense was, honestly, it was dog crap. And their defense and Phil Parker is what helped them win the West and their special teams. Purdue's another team that has an offensive identity, and yet because of how talented and good of a player George Karlaftis is, he was drafted in the first round. Part of me is surprised that David Bell wasn't taken in the first round, just because of how wide receivers were just being taken off the board, and there was obviously a need for them, especially the Packers. I don't even know what the Packers were doing, but I'm not an NFL expert, so I'm not going to criticize them too much. But back to Ohio State. Their identity is becoming more and more offensive, less and less defensive. Even with the arrival of Jim Knowles, better secondary coaches, etc. A part of me wonders, and if you're an Ohio State fan, tell me this down below, are we ever going to see Ohio State get several first-round defensive linemen or several first-round secondary players drafted in the same round again, like Jeff Okudah and Damon Arnett in the 2020 NFL draft or such? Or are you ever going to see a Chase Young and then the Bosa brothers in like the same decade or span of time? Because having the Bosa brothers and then Chase Young all coming out of the same school in relatively the same, in exactly the same decade is phenomenal. Not too many schools can do that. And I wonder, as Larry Johnson, he's getting older. He's going to be retiring in the next few years. He's not Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's not the Terminator. He's going to be retiring soon. Part of me wonders if just not because you don't have the talent there, or not because those players aren't elite, but just because the overall focus, what Ryan Day wants Ohio State to be, you're going to see a lot more offensive NFL talent moving forward, but less NFL talent on defense, if that makes sense. That's just what I'm wondering, though. It's hard to predict the future. Ohio State, you have JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, Zach Harrison, who I think all were 5 stars. Tuimoloau and Sawyer were from the same class. Harrison was from a different class. But you still have a lot of talent on the defensive line, a lot of talent at secondary. It was just a little thought in my head that I had, so I wanted to say it. And even though Ohio State didn't get a quarterback drafted, and they won't because they didn't have an eligible quarterback to be drafted, C.J. Stroud was too young by rule of NCAA rules to enter this year's NFL draft. But under Ryan Day, at least under his guidance, you have seen Dwayne Haskins, you've seen Justin Fields, and you're going to likely see C.J. Stroud all in the first round. That's likely 3 first-round quarterbacks in a short span of time. And for certain, two. Justin Fields had a lot of talent, still does. Dwayne Haskins, again, rest in peace. He had a lot of talent, was going to get that second chance in Pittsburgh and compete with Mitchell Trubisky. And CJ Stroud could honestly go number one overall. That wouldn't shock me at all. He's so talented at QB. He has a good frame. He's being coached by possibly the best offensive mind, probably the best offensive mind in college football. It'll be curious to see whether him or Young or someone else go first overall. And finally, I just want to review the Big Ten picks. So Michigan, again, you got Aidan Hutchinson, second overall pick, defensive end from Michigan. He had 14 sacks, broke the school record for sacks in a season. You had safety Daxton Hill, who went 31st to the Bengals. Hutchinson went to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Daxton Hill, he played corner. He played a variety of different safety roles. He was critical to Michigan's defense, by far the most talented player on that secondary. And the Michigan secondary really benefited from him, benefited from Steve Clinkscale's coaching. If we're being honest, it just is what it is. The secondary unit was horrible in 2020, pretty bad under Don Brown. And yet Daxton Hill survived. He didn't take too many of the bad aspects from Don Brown's defense, quickly adapted to Clinkscale's just style of play and McDonald's play calling and style of play as well, and came out as a first rounder from 5-star to first round, which surprisingly enough isn't very common all the time. Oftentimes 5-stars could even end up being undrafted. They could be total busts in college. And then you have Cooper Kupp, who wasn't even ranked in high school and was the NFL's best wide receiver this past season. Ohio State, you had Garrett Wilson, drafted 10th overall, and I think that he went to the Jets, is what I remember. Yes, he went to the Jets, 10th overall. Olave went 11th overall to the Saints. These two guys, possibly not even the best in their class, honestly. Possibly not even the best in their own wide receiver room, because Jackson Smith-Njigba, who will be the best, in my opinion, wide receiver in the 2023 NFL draft, is still there. And he also, I don't think at least, maybe he was, maybe he just elected to come back. I don't think he was eligible to move on and be drafted. Again, correct me if I'm wrong down in the comments below. But these two, Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, the best wide receivers in the nation, or at least some of the best. Olave broke the school record for receiving touchdowns, I believe. He was a 3-star coming out of high school. So Olave is the embodiment of Brian Hartline's development. Taking a 3-star talent, a guy who had Jack Tuttle as his high school quarterback, and Jack Tuttle, if we're being honest, is not a good quarterback, and taking that, a wide receiver who played with Jack Tuttle, similar rated guy, and taking him to a first rounder, that right there is how good of a wide receivers coach Brian Hartline is. Garrett Wilson, 5-star out of high school, and top 10 overall pick. Again, showcasing Hartline's development. Wilson was the freakiest athlete in Ohio State's wide receiver room. That one touchdown pass against Michigan, where there was perfect coverage against him and he still got the ball in the touchdown, that was fascinating to watch. Penn State, you had Jahan Dotson at 16th. He was good. If Penn State just had a better offensive scheme, better QB, better O-line, Dotson's numbers would have been higher. He might have been picked higher, or at least where he was picked, which was pretty high, according to most. I don't think a lot had him going this high, but then again, I didn't check a lot of mock drafts. This would have been more expected. Dotson he's really good, and you could see it from earlier than this year. You saw it in 2020 against Ohio State when he made the one-handed catch. You saw it in 2019. And this year, when he had big games, and he positively impacted Penn State's offense, they have had their series of struggles for the past several years, and he positively impacted that offense and the wide receiver room. You have Parker Washington at Penn State, you have Keandre Lambert-Smith, and you have Mitchell Tinsley as well, an incoming transfer from Western Kentucky. I'll be interested to see where they get drafted, if one of them fills Dotson's role and also gets drafted in the first round. Iowa, you had Tyler Linderbaum. It's not a huge surprise here. Linderbaum is an elite offensive lineman. Iowa, much like Wisconsin, is also known for producing offensive linemen and shipping them off to the NFL draft. Eat the pizza, move on to the NFL, get paid the big bucks. That's kind of how it seems to roll at schools like Iowa and Wisconsin with their O-lines, their tight ends, their mediocre to bad QB play, whatever. But good for him. Some thought that he was the best player of the entire draft. I keep seeing posts where people claim that he's the best in the entire draft, but because he's a center, that he's not going to go first overall, which, you know what, is believable. Maybe he is the best player, but he was drafted 25th overall, Linderbaum was, by the Baltimore Ravens. And finally, you have George Karlaftis from the Purdue Boilermakers, who was drafted 30th overall to the Kansas City Chiefs. Purdue, it's weird because they are a team whose identity is offense, as I discussed earlier. And yet, you have George Karlaftis here, defensive end from Purdue, very talented guy. His younger brother, Yanni, is on the team as a linebacker. And what makes this even more interesting is you have David Bell, who could have probably been drafted in the first round, as there were teams like Green Bay, for example, who probably could have used him, or maybe still can use him. And David Bell was one of the best wide receivers in the nation as well. And he, oddly enough, did not get drafted in the first round, but Karlaftis did. And speaking of Purdue, and this is going to be the last thing I say, Purdue, they have Aidan O'Connell. I'm very interested to see where he is going to get drafted next year, because he is a great QB. He will, for sure, in my opinion, be a top 3, top 4 QB in the Big Ten next year. It looks very likely he's going to be around the 2 to 3 range, which is really good. And when he doesn't make bad decisions, when he doesn't have a turnover-heavy game, he's the second best, possibly, because he has an inferior supporting cast to Stroud, possibly the best QB in the Big Ten. But that's where I want to end this video. Thank you all for watching. If you like this video, make sure to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, click the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. I'll be making a Georgia video regarding their team and the success their team had in the NFL draft, specifically their defense, in a few days, and I'll continue my normal coverage of mainly Big Ten college football. And now that the spring games are mostly over, watch out for me releasing new updated conference record predictions and a new top 25 video. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys around. Bye.